A geopolitical harmony between two countries can always be difficult to attain. Economic and bilateral ties with any nation comes with its own set of challenges. Nepal has had its own fair share of issues with its southern neighbor, India. Today in Kantipur News, we'll try and seek for solutions, opinions, suggestions and headway, if any, from our guest, Professor Shivshankar Menon, who is currently an academician but has also served as the National Security Advisor for Indian government and also Secretary at the Ministry of External Affairs. Welcome to Kantipur News, Professor Menon.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We understand that you are very tightly scheduled at the moment, but have you had the time to settle in and enjoy the festive atmosphere here?
It's always good to come to Kathmandu and to see old friends. Yes, but there's never enough time to enjoy it, I think.
So we've had the pleasure to welcome you for Kantipur Conclave, and your presence along with other dignitaries from Europe and South Asia means that we really are trying to go beyond boundaries as well with this conclave. Do you think these events actually help to further fuel or progress the discourse regarding economic, bilateral ties, climate change issues?
I think they're very important because for two reasons. One is it gives us a chance to meet our friends, talk to each other, but more important because we face a common set of problems, kinds of problems that we face today, whether it's the international economy or whether it's climate change. And you know, the Prime Minister was talking about landslides, floods and the effects of climate change. These are common problems. These don't recognize any boundaries between us. And if we don't sit and talk about them together, find ways of dealing with them together, frankly, I think we are derelict in our duty to ourselves, to our own people. So we need to do this. And this kind of conclave, which is both formal and informal, which brings people from across the region together, this is really useful, I think, because you can talk in ways that governments find more difficult. And it combines everyone. So yes, I do believe that this is very important, the Kantipur Conclave. And I think what you've done with 3 sessions, you can see from the level of participation how influential and how important it is.
You've observed Nepal and India ties for many years as you've worked for the government as well and as an academician as well. Mm-hmm. How have you viewed our relation evolving over the course of time?
Well, it's an interesting evolution because both countries have changed tremendously. I mean, I'm an old man. I've seen what these countries were. I first came to Nepal in 1968. That's a long time ago. And frankly, so it hasn't been easy always, but I've always thought that whatever problems we've had are problems of intimacy. It's because you can't draw a real line between us, because we are so involved in each other's lives, whether it's economically, socially, even politically. We watch each other very closely, and certainly our security and so on is all interlinked. So given that, I think it's natural that as we change, as the world changes, we will face new issues. But I think so far we haven't done a bad job, if you look at it.
You said there have probably been lapses on both the sides?
Yep.
Such as?
Well, I think, you know, as long as you learn from things that go wrong and move on, I think that's the important thing. Not to keep, you know, going back to a wound. And I think both sides need to learn and say, okay, we're not going to make these mistakes again. I think there are moments when we didn't understand each other's sensitivities. But, you know, I think it happens between all neighbors. And especially because we're neighbors, we have to be doubly careful.
Nepal enjoys trade surplus with very few nations and deficit with many, the biggest being with India.
I think in today's world, formal trade deficits actually count for much less. Because if you look at what India exports to Nepal, a large part of it actually consists of things, intermediate goods, which come from other places. Maybe somewhere in the subcontinent, maybe even from Nepal or from outside. When we look at India's exports, for instance, something like 40% of the value added in India's total exports comes from intermediate goods from other countries, from third countries. So trade is no longer, I think, a valid measure. What I was suggesting today in my talk was that we need to look at the framework within which we operate, like payment systems. We all go through, you know, all kinds of other currencies. We have certain special arrangements among ourselves. We need to look at them again in today's situation and see how that works. And that, I think, is more important for the future, so that we encourage trade and economic activity in both our countries.
The theoretical potential of Nepal's hydropower is around 80,000, but practical potential is only 45,000.
Yeah,
5% of which we've been able to...
Shivshankar a long time ago, I think in 1956, he came up with that figure. And I don't think it was very scientifically. He worked with what he had. In those days, you didn't have much data. So, but even 40,000 is a lot.
5%. We've only been able to, you know,
I know.
work on 5%
and
of
it. I think the blame is shared, because we look at it in zero-sum terms. Oh, if he's gaining, I must be losing. That's not true. This is a case where both sides gain by using this potential. And I'm glad that A, Nepal is now taking care of its own. That's a remarkable turnaround that you've achieved in the last few years. But B, that we're all looking at it differently, that Nepal is exporting power.
It is.
To India. And that's a big change. I mean, I think you should take credit for it.
One of the Indian companies, GMR, is working on Upper Karnali hydropower project that has 900 megawatts capacity.
That's a big one.
The problem is the company has not been able to raise funds for the hydropower project.
Yeah.
So where do you think the lapses are?
No, I think that energy market, if you look at the last 5 years actually, prices have it's been so volatile. So the economics of energy is changing in fundamental ways. I was seeing an opportunity not just in hydro, but actually in other forms of energy. But increasingly, with fossil fuel prices going through the roof and the need not to use coal because of the environmental effects, I think we will have no option but to turn to hydro. And there will be money for hydro. There will be money for solar, for wind. We have a big opportunity there.
Let's talk about the potential of Nepal-India alliance in the energy sector. Give an overall perspective on it. What do you think of it?
Well, the way I like to think of it is that as a sub-region, South Asia needs to look, we have energy supplies and we have huge demand. And it's a question of matching the two. And that takes more than just a Nepal-India alliance. I think it'll have to be, you have to look at the larger grid connectivity, at the larger issues of when and where you need the energy and getting it to them and wheeling it through. I mean, if Bangladesh needs power, Nepal has surplus, India takes some of it, gives it to wherever it needs it, but gives Bangladesh something else. It doesn't have to be exactly the same power. But when you look at it as a sub-region, as all of South Asia, I think it becomes easier to deal with these problems. And then Nepal's potential actually is tremendous.
Now let's get into the crux of all the issues between India and Nepal, the border issue.
Yeah.
There have been many pending problems when it comes to border issues, like Lipu Lake, Kalapani region that have been disputed. How has India observed this issue, and have there been misinterpretations of geographical sovereignty of the two sides?
Yeah. I think there's two parts to this question. One is, these are relatively new boundary issues, and they're a consequence of the hardening of sovereignty and of national consciousness, and we must be therefore defensive of our Westphalian sovereignty. And that, frankly, the states have to settle between themselves. It's something that, public opinion, nobody else can settle. This is basically state-to-state business. And states find it very hard because, for leaders, sovereignty, territorial integrity, this is the core of their leadership, and they're they find that difficult. But I think what the rest of us can do and should do is to make borders irrelevant in practice. The fact that you might have different ideas of whether one particular strip of land between you belongs to one or the other, that shouldn't affect people's lives. Let the states sort out their problem when they can, between themselves. But at least people's lives should go on. Trade, travel, all the normal business, whether pilgrimage, intermarriage, whatever. And if you can do that, then at least you've created a much more peaceful context in which this doesn't become, you know. Problem is that these issues are used for domestic political mobilization. And that's where then it becomes a zero-sum issue.
Political
but it's
agenda
not, and it's so, but it's not leading to a solution. If it were left just to the states, and if the states were told, you have to solve this issue among yourselves, but we're going to treat it as irrelevant to the lives of our people, and we're going to make it irrelevant to the lives of our people, I think we have a much better chance of actually moving forward. And that's why what, you know, making boundaries irrelevant is really important, because frankly, these are artificial boundaries. After all, these are man-made artifacts, right? So it's a man-made problem. So man should be able to solve it.
I think I speak for the general public when I say there's a general frustration among the public when it comes to the border issues. Has there been any unwillingness on part of our southern neighbor in, you know, sitting down and then talking?
No, I think we've always said we're willing to, we're quite happy to. That's not, in fact, we've said we're happy to talk about the border boundary, we're happy to talk about the treaty, we're happy to discuss any of these things. One part of this, because leaders, politicians use it for domestic political mobilization to consolidate the base, they have no interest in really discussing it or settling it. It's a useful issue, but as an issue. So if you look at it, even though we've said consistently we're ready to talk, come and talk, it never happens. And why hasn't it happened for all these years? Because it's an issue that's used until the citizens tell their leaders that we're not going to be led like this by the nose. And this is where it's important that we talk about things that you have things like a Kantipur Conclave where we can talk to each other as citizens and say, what's our interest in this? How does it help the welfare of our people? Is this really an issue, or are there more serious issues? You know?
So you're saying it's us that lacks the political and diplomatic initiatives?
No, I'm saying that today you're in a situation where it suits some politicians to maintain these issues as issues. Therefore, their interest in settling them is minimal. And they don't actually, they will keep saying, oh, the other side's not talking and they're not settling and so on. But they're using the issue. But the rest of us, ordinary people, like you and me, we shouldn't be fooled by this.
You've also served as Indian ambassador for China. Nepal seems to be finding itself in a tough spot with India every time it shows some inclination towards the northern neighbor. Is it true?
I don't think so. I think we've always said that, you know, what Nepal does with China is Nepal's business. What worries us is when it affects India's security. And there are parts of it which will. After all, we have an open border. We have a completely free trading arrangement between us. So if China uses her presence and her relationship with Nepal and to use these things to India's detriment, yes, there will be Indian concern. That's the worry. So there will be Indian sensitivity. There will be Indian concern. But that doesn't mean that India says, oh, you can't have a relationship with China. No, never. We've never said that. Never from the 50s onwards. Nepal's legitimate interest in maintaining a relationship with both India and with China, I mean, that's Nepal's business. And we are nobody to tell you what you should do. But if it affects our interests, obviously we will tell you. Just as I'm sure the Chinese will tell you if it affected their interest. I mean, why are they so sensitive about anything relating to Tibet and the Tibetans? Because they think it affects their interest. So they come to you with that. So this is normal. This is politics. And I think it's not so bad for Nepal, because Nepal gets a fair amount of leverage out of this situation.
Does it?
I think it does.
Can we put it into words? How?
Well, you look at the investment that both countries put into developing projects and connectivity and so on. And that's part of it is Nepal's location, because it's strategically located between these two countries.
We formed the Eminent Persons Group so that we can, mull over the bilateral issues between the two countries. The group finalized its report in 2018. But have there been misunderstandings or...
I really don't know enough about it. You have to ask Mahendra Lama, who's here at the conference, who was one of the eminent persons, I think.
Professor Menon,
thank you very much.
Thank you for giving us the benefit of your expertise.
Thank you for having me here. I enjoyed that.